For most of history, winter was not something people escaped. It was something they endured inside poorly heated homes, drafty rooms, and uninsulated walls. Long before central heating, doctors and household manuals warned that how you breathed in cold indoor air could determine whether you stayed healthy or slowly weakened through the season. What they advised was not mystical or symbolic. It was practical, repeatable, and rooted in observation. This was known informally as the winter breathing rule, and it was taught as seriously as food rationing or fire management. Understanding it today gives us a window into how people lived through cold seasons without modern comfort, and how some of those methods still quietly work. 19th and early 20th century physicians understood that cold indoor air did not just chill the body, it altered respiration. Medical texts warned that breathing cold, dry air directly into the lungs caused constriction of airways, thickened mucus, slowed circulation, and increased susceptibility to chest infections. This was not theoretical. Doctors saw higher winter mortality in cold houses even when food was sufficient. Their conclusion was simple. The lungs had to be protected from cold air just as much as hands and feet. The rule they taught was that winter breathing should always be slow, nasal, and warmed before it reached the lungs. Mouth breathing in cold rooms was discouraged outright. It was associated with sore throats, bronchitis, and lingering coughs that could last an entire winter. The nose was treated as a necessary tool, not a convenience. Medical guides stressed that nasal breathing warmed and humidified air before it reached the lungs. The nasal passages acted as a heat exchanger, raising the temperature of cold air and filtering dust and smoke common in winter homes. Doctors advised parents to correct children who slept with open mouths and recommended scarves or cloth wraps over the lower face when sitting still in cold rooms. This was applied every single day. Folks were told to consciously slow their breathing when stepping into a cold room, inhale through the nose, and then pause just a little before exhaling. The idea here was to keep cold air from, shocking the chest. In real life, this meant fewer deep gasps and more measured breaths, especially when getting up from bed in the morning or sitting near those unheated walls. Doctors, they warned against deep, forceful inhalations in cold interiors. They figured that sudden deep breaths pulled cold air right into the lower lungs, and that could weaken your resistance to infection. So, winter breathing was taught to be shallow to moderate while resting, only getting deeper when you were working hard and your body heat was already up. Household manuals, they advised warming the body up before doing any hard work. Folks were told to move around, stretch, or do a bit of light work before breathing deeply. That way, you'd avoid the sharp contrast between cold lungs and warm blood, which doctors thought led to winter illnesses. Even nowadays, this advice matches up with what we know about airway sensitivity in cold conditions. Sleep was, considered a vulnerable state. Doctors believed that breathing cold air for hours during sleep weakened the lungs even more than daytime exposure. Bedroom advice back then included keeping the head elevated just a little, making sure blankets covered the chest fully, and, avoiding any drafts blowing right across the face. Folks were encouraged to breathe through the nose while sleeping sometimes, even using light cloths tied loosely under the chin to keep from mouth breathing. Now, while this might sound a bit extreme, it really showed just how seriously folks took winter breathing. The goal here wasn't comfort, but survival through those long, cold months when there just weren't any antibiotics around. This knowledge, honestly, still applies in practical ways today. In an unheated or poorly heated room, try to consciously slow your breathing and keep it nasal when you're sitting or resting. If you wake up in a cold bedroom, avoid taking deep mouth breaths before you get a chance to warm up. Sit up, breathe slowly through your nose, and let your body temperature rise a bit before moving around. When you're working in a cold indoor space like a garage, shed, or maybe even an off-grid cabin, it's a good idea to start with some light movement before you get into any heavy breathing. And, if you're just resting or reading in a cold room, covering your lower face with a scarf still helps reduce how much cold air your lungs are exposed to. These are just simple actions, really, that don't need any special equipment, and honestly, they're the same things folks have relied on for generations. As central heating became widespread, doctors no longer needed to address cold indoor air as a health threat. Medical training shifted toward pharmaceuticals and climate-controlled environments. The breathing rule was not disproven, it simply became irrelevant to modern housing. Yet millions of people still live in cold homes during winter, whether by choice, necessity, or circumstance. For those living off-grid, conserving fuel, or enduring winter power outages, this knowledge becomes immediately relevant again. The body responds the same way it did a century ago. Cold air still stresses the lungs, nasal breathing still warms it, controlled respiration still reduces irritation and fatigue. This is not a curiosity. It is a working example of practical medical knowledge shaped by lived experience rather than laboratory theory. It shows how deeply people understood their bodies in relation to environment. The winter breathing rule was not about comfort or wellness trends. It was about reducing illness when medicine had little to offer beyond prevention. Studying these methods sharpens our understanding of daily survival in the past and gives us tools that remain useful today. It also reminds us that history preserved more than stories. It preserved instructions for living. If you value serious, usable historical knowledge like this, subscribe to Living Through the Seasons. Share this guide with others who care about practical history and real-world survival wisdom. These lessons only stay alive if they're passed on.